These days, anything with a Nikon name on it, the asking prices are rather high. Sometimes it's worth it, but sometimes it isn't. And in this case, I don't think it's the best 50 1.8 out there by a long shot. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode, and thank you once again for joining me. Well, we've shot lots and lots of lenses on this channel that I've really liked. Lots of lovely vintage lenses that will give you loads of quirks and loads of character and loads of that vintage feel that we get from these lovely old vintage lenses. And almost all of them I've loved, but today I'm going to talk to you about one, two, three, four. Actually, I'm going to talk to you about four lenses that I haven't really particularly well got on with or liked. And the first is this one. This is the Nikon, I know it's a Nikon because it says Nikon on the front, Series E 50mm f1.8. Yeah, the Nikon Series E 50mm f1.8. These days, anything with a Nikon name on it tends to, the asking prices are rather high, and in fact they're often unfairly high just because it's got that Nikon name on the front. Sometimes it's worth it, but sometimes it isn't. And in this case, honestly, I don't think this is a really great lens. I don't think it's the best 50 1.8 out there by a long shot. It's sharp enough in the center. It has good center sharpness, and it doesn't really sharpen up actually. Even if you set it to around f8, it'll sharpen up a bit, but it doesn't sharpen up very much. The corners and the sides will sharpen, of course, but the center stays much the same. And generally the image is a little bit flat. Let me just show you the lens close up first before I say any more. So there's our little Nikon Series E, and it's a nice enough little lens. Let me take it off the adapter and show it to you in its actual genuine form, and you can see it's a very small lens. It's almost a pancake lens. It's very small thing. It's got apertures from f1.8 right the way up to f22, so it's got lots and lots of aperture settings, very wide range of aperture settings on this lens, and it's got the familiar Nikon colorings on it as well, which is nice. And generally it's a lovely little lens in engineering terms, in construction terms. Everything turns nicely, everything's nicely made, and there you can see the coatings on those optics, and it does have some nice coatings, and they do protect against glare pretty well. However, my gripe with this lens is, as I've said, it doesn't really sharpen up terribly much past its maximum aperture. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but in the center it's sharp at f1.8, but when you set it to f8 or f5.6, what happens is the center gets a tiny little bit sharper, and the edges get sharper too, also the corners. So really, in terms of sharpness, it's not a great lens. It's sharp enough wide open, it's not really awful. It's sharp enough wide open, but I don't know, it doesn't really do what a lens should do when you stop it down. The colors actually I find to be a little bit flat with this lens. I don't really find it makes the best colors, despite it having Nikon optics, Nikon glass, and having that Nikon name on the front. I don't really feel that this lens is really the best value for money. I think really you're better going for, if you want a Nikon 50 1.8, you're really better going for the AI series or the Rabbits Here series, not these Series E 51.8, because it really isn't that fantastic. Blur is reasonably nice. It can get a little bit harsh from time to time, but it's nice enough. It's nice enough blur. But colours are flat and it doesn't sharpen up like it should. So this is really not one of my favourite lenses, I'm sorry to have to say. Now I've got another lens to show you. It's over here, sitting upon this Praktica FX2, and let's see if we can get it off. It's an M42, so it should undo fairly easily. There we go. Now then, this is quite a nice lens, and I've got the original here somewhere. This is the Meyer Oreston 50mm f1.8, and they are the same lens. So what happened was, in the late 70s, I think the late 70s, there was a merger into a great big company called VEB Pentacon in the East German photographic industry. This is as I understand it. Please do correct me if I'm wrong. This is as I understand it. Am I recording sound? Yes, I am. It's just as well. So let's put the Pentacon lens down for a minute. So the Meyer lens, it's a nice enough lens. It's not a bad 50 1.8, and it's certainly not the worst 50 1.8. Let's have a closer look before we say anything more. So there's our little Meyer Optic Oreston 50mm, and it's all very nicely made. It's got this nice sort of aluminium black finish, alternating finish there. It's an M42 mount, though there were plenty made in Exacta mount also, and also in Praktica B mount. So that's the lens, and it's a 50 1.8, and it's a nice enough lens. There's nothing really wrong with it. It's not a bad lens as such, and it's certainly not the worst 50 1.8 in the world, and I'd rate it rather better actually than the Nikon Series E that we just looked at. However, I don't actually dislike this lens. I like it. It can make nice images and it can do some really nice things, and I'm quite attached to the Meyer Oreston and the Pentacon B lenses, the Pentacon 1.8 f1.8 50mm, that is the same lens as this one. My question though, and the reason that I've taken issue with this lens is, somebody at VEB Pentacon thought, right, well, we'll take the Meyer Oreston and we'll use that as our standard lens. This became the Pentacon Auto 1.8 50, became the standard lens on many Praktica cameras. This was the kit lens that you would get. Now, that's okay, there's no problem with that, but why, oh why did the East German photographic industry not use the Carl Zeiss Jena Pankolar 51.8 as their standard lens, or at least use some of the optics from it, some of the techniques from it, some of the coatings from it, something that would make it a little bit nicer than this Pentacon 50 1.8. The Pentacon's nice, the Oreston also, same lens, nice, not a bad lens. Blur can be a bit harsh if you're not careful, but you can work around that, that's all right. It's sharp enough, the colours are nice enough, but why base your standard kit lens on the Meyer Oreston when you've got in your kit, in your collection, in your patents, the Carl Zeiss Jena Pankolar? That really beats me, and I don't understand it. So that's why I've decided to include this lens today. Okay, so to continue with the odyssey of lenses that I'm not particularly keen on, let's now turn to, let's now turn to this lens. Now you may recognize this lens, it's quite recognizable. It's the Konica Hexanon AR 57mm f1.4, and I have talked a fair bit about this lens recently. I bought this at the Photographica exhibition a couple of years ago, I think now, and I didn't realize it was the earlier Hexanon series. There was a later Hexanon AR series that was just beautiful. This is one of the earlier Hexanon AR lenses. It's also radioactive, which is why I'm not looking at it too closely, getting it too close to my eyes. Let's have a little look before we go any further, and then I'll tell you why I was a little disappointed with it. So there's our Konica Hexanon lens, and you can see that it's slightly orange from all the radioactive stuff that's going on inside of it. Probably does have quite a bit of thorium in it, this one, but you know, it doesn't matter too much as long as you're careful. It's quite a heavy lens. It all works nicely. It's manufactured really, really nicely. Everything's put together really, really nicely. There's the Konica mount on the back. Nothing too much to see there. It has apertures from f1.4 all the way up to f16, so it's got a very good wide range of aperture values, and it is an f1.4 lens, so it does open up pretty wide, and it does make quite a bit of blur. Mechanically, it's a beautiful lens. Optically, however, the story is a little different. I very often like to shoot lenses wide open, and that's what I did with this one. As soon as I got it, I thought, well, I'll shoot it wide open. It's a Konica Hexanon. The colours are going to be fantastic. It's going to be nice and sharp. Everything's going to be really cool about the images from this lens shot wide open. Unfortunately, I was disappointed, because wide open, this lens is really not that great. I think it comes from an era when it wasn't that easy to manufacture an f1.4 lens, and that's why most of the older f1.4s are of longer focal lengths. This one's a 57mm, which is near enough to 50 as makes no odds, but there you go. But yeah, so wide open, everything's rather flat. There's nothing really jumps out. The colours are a bit flat and muted and almost dead, really, in a way. And I really, really didn't like what this lens can do wide open. Stop it down to f2.8 and it really comes alive. This lens turns into an absolute beauty if you stop it down to f2.8, but wide open, it really doesn't work terribly well. Don't forget, this lens was from an era when 400 ISO film was considered really fast, and you know, you were lucky if you could find that, and you were even luckier if you could find some 800. So to get that one stop more of light in your lens, that was important in the film days, and that's why lenses like these were manufactured. Of course, these days it doesn't matter too much. You just whack up your ISO a bit if there's not enough light. It will make a nice portrait, although the contrast is fairly low, so you might have to do some work in post-production to bring that contrast up. The blur is nice. It's very, very unpredictable blur, but it can be very nice blur. And it's one of those old lenses that has a lot of quirks and a lot of flaws. So it will make you a nice portrait, but you'll have to work at your portrait. You'll have to do some post-production on it, which with the later Konica 50mm Hexanon AR f1.4 you wouldn't have to do, or at least certainly nothing like as much. But this one did leave me feeling a little disappointed with what it could do wide open. So for that reason, this is one of the lenses I'm not particularly keen on. So you can go back onto the piano, onto F, G and A, if I'm not wrong. Now the fourth lens I'm going to show you is sitting up here. Let me see if I can extricate it without knocking any of these other cameras off. Right, here we are. This is the lens. This is the one. This is lens number 4 that I'm not particularly keen on. I can't say the same for the camera, because the camera is the Fed 3. This is a lovely, lovely camera. Just look at that camera. Look at the design. It's fantastic. It's almost as good as the Zorki 3. It might even be better. And the Feds were always a little bit better made than the Zorki. I've not used this camera very much. It's an L39 rangefinder, and it'll take any L39 lens. At the moment, though, it's got this one on it, the Industar 26. So let's just whip it off. We'll pop this over here. And we'll just have a think about this little lens. Let me show you it closely before we say anything more about it. So there's our little Industar 26, and if you know the Industar 61, you will know that this is a very, very similar lens. The Industar 61 is all black in colour. This one has a very beautiful polished aluminium body with probably some varnish or lacquer on it or something. It really is a beautiful little thing. The aperture is stepless. It doesn't have any steps on it, unlike the Industar 61, which does have detents on it to tell you exactly at what point you are. This one's different, and you can move at any point you want between those indicated settings on the dial. So a stepless aperture mechanism. It turns very nicely and cleanly. The focus ring turns beautifully, smoothly and cleanly. There is a little plate here that you can take off, which has grease behind it. If you take that plate off, clean it and put new grease in it, lithium-based grease is possibly the best for that application. You'll find your lens is much, much smoother. So this one turns really nicely and smoothly, just like butter. However, I'm not too keen on the images that the lens produces. It's a competent enough lens, all right? So I'm not trying to say that this is a lens that no one should ever try, no one should ever buy, no one should ever use. It's a competent enough lens, but I wouldn't go any further than that. I wouldn't go beyond the word competent. It's certainly not as nice as the Industar 61 that followed it, and that's quite strange. I don't really know what happened between the two. I know that the Industar 61 had lanthanum added to it, which is a rare earth element, which is very, very, very slightly radioactive, but absolutely not dangerous, so I'm informed. So maybe that made the difference. I don't think this one has any lanthanum in it, but the images I got from this lens, it's a nice clean lens. If I look through it, through the light, there's no mold or fungus or nasties or anything horrible in there. But the images I got from this lens, I don't know, they were just really flat and a little bit disappointing. And, you know, you could stop it down, you can shoot it wide open. It is very, very sharp actually, wide open, so you can shoot it wide open all day at its maximum of 2.8. It runs from 2.8 up to f22, so it's got a good range of aperture openings. It's a sharp lens, it's inherently sharp, but it doesn't sharpen up that much as you stop it down. Probably about, I don't know, probably about f4's the sweet spot, maybe f5.6. But whatever I did with this lens, I couldn't seem to coax anything out of it that I could really say, gosh, that's a fantastic image, those colors really pop, or anything like that. Nothing that particularly impressed me. The colors are a little bit flat, they're a little bit down, they're a little bit muted. It works fairly nicely in black and white, but it's a low contrast lens, and blacks are not that black and whites are not that white, and the range of contrast is not particularly great on this lens. So I don't think this is really anything like as good actually as the Industar 61 that came after it. Try it, have a go of it. I mean, they're practically free. You can buy a lens like this for £10, sometimes for £5. They're really, really cheap, so it's worth having a go with. But I found it too flat for my liking. I didn't really find that it had enough pop and enough power and enough, I don't know, enough energy to make it a likable lens for me, and I was a little bit disappointed. The one thing it does really nicely, apart from the other thing it does really nicely, one thing it does really nicely is blur. It does have some very nice background blur. It's f2.8, it doesn't make a lot, and it's a rangefinder lens, so it only goes to 3 feet or 1 meter, but what blur it makes is really quite nice. And the other thing that it does really nicely, or fairly nicely, is render rather delicate greys in between the blacks and whites. If you're shooting in black and white, it will render shades of grey quite delicately. So it's almost a sort of an uncoated, pre-war image, if you like, except not quite as nice because it does have some coatings on it, and it's trying hard not to be a pre-war lens, although the coatings on this lens I don't think are terribly great. So there we are. That's 4 lenses that are all competent in their own way and are all nice in their own way, but I was a little bit disappointed with. And you, sir, can go back on the piano on notes C, D and E, and it's a jolly good job I haven't got the piano switched on at the moment, because we would have quite a lot of discord, I think. Now, there are loads of vintage lenses out there, hundreds, possibly thousands of vintage lenses out there that will make you fantastic, fantastic images. And we've looked at quite a few of them on this show. But I did think today that I would let you know about some that I haven't really got on with. And those 4 are they. So we've got the Industar 26, the Konica Hexanon 57 millimeter f1.4, not the 50 but the 57. We've got the Nikon Series E, which is frankly disappointing, and we've got the Meyer Oreston, Meyer Optic Gorlitz Oreston, which eventually became the Praktica B. Exactly the same optics, exactly the same lens. Why on earth didn't they use the CZJ or some of the CZJ technology? I just don't know. So there we are. So I guess that's it from me for this week. I would like to thank you all very, very much for watching, and I'm really really appreciative of how many people come back time after time to watch this show. It really is very, very heartening. Many, many thanks to subscribers. That's genuine, heartfelt thanks to you. And many, many thanks to patrons. A genuine, heartfelt thanks to you for your support. Thank you, everybody, for your support. But as from me, I guess that's it for this week. So, if you're not doing anything too vexing, irksome, irritating or bothersome next week at this time or around this time, please don't forget to tune in for a spot more Zenography. Cheerio all.